Hi, Renee.
Hey, Lance. How's week 3 going?
It's going well. Yeah, just still accommodating, but I think I feel a little bit more comfortable in getting things balanced between, distance learning and work. And yeah, it's going pretty well. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. It does feel like we're settling a bit more into a routine, a bit of a new normal.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's never going to be completely normal, but I think we're adapting pretty well. And yeah, talking to everybody else at work and my clients, it's people are kind of coming around too. So it's encouraging.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's been really surprising to me is how busy that we are. I think between internally trying to figure out the best way to address all the new questions and challenges that are coming up with us, and how many conversations we're having with customers and, all who have a slightly different challenge they're wrestling with in terms of this. And so I think at the very beginning, I was like, well, are we all just going to be sitting around having like a lot of like looking for, internal things to keep ourselves busy with? And no, it has been like moving at lightning speed.
Yeah. Yeah, just different questions, and it takes a little bit more collaboration too. Sometimes, like we don't know exactly what to do in some of these situations, so it's takes a little bit more time to even figure out some of the normal things. So yeah, it's definitely not slower. Like you were saying, things seem pretty busy. So this is our first real episode. We had the teaser, thanks to those of you that joined. Let's go ahead and maybe introduce who we are and what we're doing. So I'll go first since I'm talking. Lance Andrews. My education, like Renee, is in I-O Psychology. My background and experience is in consulting and implementing assessment programs and talent solutions for customers. So I've been doing this for a decade and a half, and working at SHL, we get to work with a lot of different companies that are experiencing a lot of different things. And what we're trying to do is use our access to different organizations and different people to connect people and build a bridge. So Renee, you want to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. Yep. So my name is Renee Barr. Like Lance said, I have a background in I-O Psychology as well. Been working again about 15 years or so, helping clients implement assessment programs, pre and post hire, all kinds of industries, different sizes. Worked with 3 or 4 different external organizations. Always been external, but yeah, you and I got talking, and we really were curious about how this was impacting our clients, but also how this was impacting our peers who were internal and external at other organizations, and really like looking for a spot to figure out how do we connect on that and exchange information.
Yeah, and I do want to give a thanks to everyone that did provide feedback. I am looking down at my notes. I did write a few things down. So thanks to those of you either on LinkedIn or Twitter who gave us some feedback. So here's a couple of things. We don't have all the answers, especially not today, but some people want to know about what role analytics, and especially as in our field of biopsychology, how analytics and our science of work will play a role in addressing some of these new organizational challenges. So I thought that was something we'll try to look for, either a guest or having that as a future topic. A lot of questions are just the general category of just the state of the hiring market, both how that affects candidates, and so what that means for candidates that may have even already been looking for work or out of work and now trying to find a job now, as well as people that are laid off and losing jobs, how the job market is changing. And then I can't wait till we get to this one, but the last one that I'll mention, I got a request for how do we return to normal when we get there. So I think that'll be a good one. So thanks. I want to give special thanks to everyone that did provide feedback, and we'll take your feedback. I'm reaching out to some additional people to join us, and we look forward to that. So yeah, thanks. As promised, we do have a special guest lined up for our first full episode, and so we're excited to introduce our friend and colleague, Andy Nelesen. So Andy's in Minnesota. Andy, you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite. My name is Andy Nelesen. I've worked for SHL for about 7 years. I've been in and around talent management for about 20. And my job is to really oversee the strategy that sits behind our volume hiring programs. So it's kind of studying the market, understanding the market context, and how we can maximize our volume hiring solutions to be optimal and most relevant. So I appreciate the time.
Great. Thanks for joining, Andy. So you've been really immersed in thinking about volume recruitment space and the candidate experience. So maybe just starting with backing up, what have we learned about the candidate experience in recent years, and just kind of share your background on what's really kind of shaping your thinking?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, I think the Talent Board, which is a nonprofit that has done some really good work on this topic, they've been documenting the candidate experience and implications that surround the candidate experience for some time now, the better part of a decade. And I think what we've realized is how critically important the candidate experience really is to driving the right kinds of candidates to your brand, to want to, to get them to want to build a relationship with you as an employer. The way that you craft experiences, the way that you deliver them to candidates, all of that really does matter, and it's become much more important as candidates have emerged as really a primary stakeholder in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about that as that stakeholder, what is the current environment? How does that impact what we need to do for those customers and engaging them as that stakeholder? Does that change now?
I think it does. Actually, I think there's a handful of relatively fundamental changes that it's really our job to stay current with. And the first is, when we first started to really focus on the candidate experience, go back even 5 years now, when we started to really realize how important it was going to be, I think we often focused a little bit too much, frankly, on measuring the quality of those experiences by the degree to which candidates felt that they were enjoyable, right? That they were satisfied by the way that experience kind of supported their decisioning. And I think what we've learned is certainly that's useful and important. We don't want to craft experiences for candidates that are unpleasant to them. Of course, that's not what I'm suggesting, but I think we have learned that creating experiences where the candidate feels like they're actually getting real, meaningful, tangible value out of them really has emerged as something that's kind of different than the way we used to think about it. And the element that really pops here is this idea of feedback. Candidates have raised their hand in a lot of different studies that I've seen that really reinforce how important they view the concept of feedback. And they're not talking about just kind of pithy feedback. Like, they're really looking for meaty, meaningful feedback that helps them understand what their perceived strengths are, even what their perceived weaknesses are. And I realize there's some challenges with how we navigate that kind of a conversation in a pre-hire context. But if you can unlock really the right way to convey meaningful feedback to candidates throughout their hiring journey with your organization, they become much more willing to want to build a partnership with you.
Yeah.
Some other element. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just, Andy, I was like reflecting on what you were just saying there and thinking about how I do really think what we've seen in the past few years is clients more open to the idea of providing feedback that certainly is not like negative. Like you're not wanting to drive people away, but providing feedback that's a bit more food for thought, which I think kind of speaks to what you were talking about there, where on the front end of it, we were really maybe focused on the idea of like appeasement and happiness and wanting them to kind of feel delighted, like a customer service experience walking away from it. But over the past couple of years, really seeing that some of the clients who've made the most inroads are ones that are giving something that's not always, the feedback itself does not have to be completely positive, like you're amazing and nothing about this job is going to be anything that's not suited to you, that the actual providing something media that's maybe saying like, these are the things that are going to be tied to your strengths or that it looks like you're going to feel good about. These are the things that you might want to consider. Is a much more, I think, maybe the word is like a genuine experience, which I also feel like is something that maybe people are responding to, is a sense of like authenticity and genuineness, that creates that thing where they feel like it is meaty, to keep reusing that word, and that makes them feel like there is a back and forth that's happening and an honesty that maybe connects to feeling like a sense of respect, and like we're all kind of adults here.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. In fact, it dovetails nicely with a couple other things that I was going to mention. So it's easy to kind of wrap your head around the idea of feedback as being something that a candidate would really kind of wrap their arms around and feel like there was some meaningful value that was given to them. But along the lines of that genuineness that you were talking about, even just little things like really conveying the sense of fairness to candidates. What we've learned is that most candidates today don't feel like inherently they will be treated fairly, which is kind of a negative starting point that we should really wrap our heads around and really truly understand. But those organizations that do convey a real honest sense of fairness, and they demonstrate that not just in their words and in their actions, and that's part of their kind of brand promise that they convey to candidates. Candidates really respond very favorably to that. I saw one study that suggests that when you feel as a candidate that you are being treated truly fairly, you're more than 30% willing to want to build a relationship with that given employer. So I think authenticity, fairness, all those things are really important. And the second point, which also dovetails, you talked about like a give and take, and I think that's another element of kind of a lesson learned that we're carrying forward, where initially I think we worked really hard to craft the right brand message, the right employer value proposition that we wanted to push to our candidates. And what we've certainly learned is that if we can pull them through more of an interactive exchange where the candidates are active participants in the brand experience, that employment brand experience, then they become, again, much more engaged, much more enthusiastic about wanting to follow through with all of the various next steps that might take place as a potential employer for them. So those, I think all of these things work together and are important considerations when you're thinking about, like, well, what are the right experiences that we want to promote to our candidates?
Yeah, so not just, almost a sales pitch in many ways. I think that's what a lot of people try to do for a while, is just like, come work with us, not putting anything controversial out there, and you don't want to do anything to, provide some genuine feedback to a candidate or have them learn something that may not be as ideal as you'd like to think, but that honest information is actually much more valued, and it helps increase the credibility. And if you put yourself in the candidate's shoes, if they're willing to tell me this now, we're going to have a good honest relationship as an employer-employee relationship. So starting that credibility building from the start.
I think that's right. Yep.
Anything else that would add that you've seen about when you think about the candidate experience?
I think the last one that's pretty important, that's worth mentioning, is really designing them from the start so that they can be data-driven. I think our partners in marketing, as they have managed their marketing funnels, have done a lot of really good work over the past 10, 15 years, making sure that they analyze their funnel in a very data-driven way. And perhaps in our rush to kind of appease candidates, to push these messages towards candidates, we didn't set them up, our programs up in such a way, our experiences up in such a way that we could really craft and monitor with data which messages are more effective than others, and even testing one kind of message experience versus another messaging experience. And I think we see that play out by the length in time that the elongation of the cycle times, the time to hire, which has increased by 84% in the past decade, which is a real challenge for many employers. And perhaps if we had leaned on data a little bit better, we might have been able to come up with some experiences that could have driven that speed while also giving to candidates some of the value elements that they need to kind of want to be engaged with you as a given employer. So if we can be a little bit more intentional from the start in what our plan is, what is our specific plan to monitor the health of this experience that we're giving to a candidate, and ideally have several options so we can weigh which one might be better. I think that's a lesson learned that's worth carrying forward.
Yeah, because
it is.
Go ahead, Renee.
It's kind of crazy when you think about how much more technology is infused into the process of hiring people, and yet the time to fill has expanded that much. And you can hear that kind of frustration and sometimes to the point of desperation, I think, for certain clients, where it's just the business challenge that presents is overwhelming, I think, at times.
Yeah, average time to hire is 33 days right now. which is a long time.
Yeah, you think it would have gone down with all the different technologies out there, but I think to the point you're also making about the lack of data, you get a lot of loud voices saying we need to have this, we need to have this, and so there's all of these great ideas. Let's add this to the hiring process because it's going to help us with retention or with our EVP or whatever that is. But it's not really, you're not really quantifying that either. So I think this will do, and then you're not really using data to guide why you've made that decision or how much value it's actually contributed to the process.
I think that also speaks to, I think there was some Gartner research that was talking about this phenomenon where you go back to kind of like the analog era of hiring where people did some research to get their short list of companies, and then they went and applied, and then they waited for a recruiter to talk to them, and then they waited to see if they were going to make it further in the process. And it was this very linear thing where the upfront work was on the applicant, and then kind of a lot of the power was really sitting with the organization. And they had this graphic that kind of presented it as nowadays what's much more common is that it's so easy to apply to a ton of jobs, especially depending on the type of job you're applying to. Apply to a bunch of places. Wait and see if they get back to you. Once they start to get back to you, okay, well then maybe I'll sort of research them, but you might be talking to recruiters before you've really researched much about it. And then okay, so you've talked to a few recruiters, now you'll go do some research, that's shortlisted, and then you decide if you want to go apply. So the whole, where the data is sitting and the order that all this is happening in has really, I think, upended our expectations that we originally designed a lot of this technology with, which is maybe one of the reasons, Andy, why I think, as you were talking about, we don't have the data that we would want to have to really guide our decision making, because the perspective we had going into it wasn't the correct kind of model or design.
Yeah, and now that the macro kind of climate, the labor market is likely to change again, is changing right underneath our very feet. How do we stay on top of monitoring that data and those insights so that we are reacting in an appropriate way, given, what this global pandemic is going to bring and the impact that it's going to have on the labor market? It really does require employers to think differently about what are the right kind of messaging elements, the right experiences that we should be crafting for candidates now, given this very real change that's happening in really all of our lives right now.
Yeah. So Andy, I guess given COVID-19, what do you think talent acquisition leaders should be focusing on right now?
Yeah, big question. But I think there are a couple things that organizations should be focused on or could be focused on. The first is an anecdote I'll share that came from a conversation with one of our large retail clients just this past week. And they're a global retailer. They're going through some real challenges, as you can imagine. And they had to make the tough decision last week to furlough just under 70,000 retail employees. And that brings with all sorts of heartache and anxiety, but it also brings some real fear, because they're envisioning that at least half of those furloughed employees will find a different job while they're on leave. And the warning, right, that we're going to have to allow stores to open up again in the grand scheme of things when COVID-19 is kind of over, or at least when we're past the peak and we're back to the point where retail stores will start opening again, that window is going to be pretty short, and they're going to envision that they're going to have to hire legitimately 35,000 employees in record time just to get their stores back up and running again, because half of their team will have probably found some employment elsewhere. And so they're taking this moment in time to really think through, what do we have to be considering if we really need to ramp that quickly? Let's be preparing. Let's be contingency planning. Let's put in all of the time and effort now, because we don't know when go time is going to come. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But we know that the window is going to be short, and we're going to have to beat our competitors to all of those potential employees. So I think that's, in many ways, that's certainly a pragmatic thing to be focusing on, but it's kind of also a positive thing to be focusing on, the idea that when I get to bring my workforce back again, so hopefully there's some benefit by just kind of a positive element to that news, but in addition to some very real pragmatic challenges that organizations should really be digging into.
Yeah, it's interesting too, listening to you talk about that example, realizing the number of different kind of spots that our clients can be in. I've been working lately with another large national retailer, but in the grocery industry, and they're just absolutely slammed at the opposite end of the spectrum, trying to figure out how do we effectively hire, thousands of temporary employees given what's going on. And that's where I think it becomes, I don't know, maybe the I-O Psych person in me is like really interested in thinking about like the different places along the spectrum that our clients inhabit, and that completely maybe they're not completely different challenges, but on the surface, what seems to be completely different challenges that folks are dealing with. And then I imagine maybe in both of those situations, those two different retailers we're talking about, it's like who does your workforce become? Who does your workforce become if they're all furloughed and then you're hiring half of them back again in one fell swoop? Like, what does that mean for culture? What does that mean for who you are? And on the flip side of it, for the people that I've been talking to, what does it mean when you're hiring thousands of temporary folks, in a rush to your culture? And then what happens to your folks who've been through this kind of experience on the other end of it from a culture perspective? And then I'm sure there's like 3 or 4 other different types of situations that organizations can be finding themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, in my role, I work with a lot of kind of prospective customers during the early diagnosis and kind of needs identification phase of our relationship. And those conversations that started a couple months ago and now are still resuming, they're still hiring, they still need to get something in place. I had one call literally this morning where, they've been going into this, they want to have a turnover solution. They want to reduce turnover because it's a big problem for them. And I just asked the question this morning, does the current and future job market, does that change that whole dynamic of what you're looking to do with this solution because of, will turnover be different? And so we don't want to make something that is, that worked 2 months ago, but not 6 months into the future. So just kind of seeing around corners, there's a lot of unknowns, but I think just being proactive and taking a step back and looking at really what is the nature of what we're trying to solve and what are the outcomes we're looking for is kind of what organizations, they don't have the answers to that, but they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and I'll add another layer of complexity. We've been doing a handful of, or a fair bit of research just on kind of the changing market landscape and how really the kind of how business is evolving. And over the past 5 years, 75% of job postings have required skills to fundamentally change because jobs themselves are changing and evolving. And I was reading a study just last week, and it was from executives were saying of all of the talent management initiatives that organizations could be focusing on, the one talent management initiative that in their view will have the highest ROI is the redesigning of jobs. So yes, there's all sorts of swirl, and different organizations are facing very different challenges, but there's also most organizations are in the midst of some sort of business transformation before COVID-19. And perhaps if you're in an organization where hiring has slowed down and we're, we've stalled on adding new recs, that sort of thing, perhaps now is a good time to really lean into this concept of how are my jobs changing? And how should they be changing? When you're running a volume hiring program and you've got to keep the recs up and you got to manage the funnel and you got to partner with the hiring managers, and it's like there's so much there, there's so much to stay on top of. It's tough to really step back and look at the jobs and figure out how they should be evolving. But I think for many of our client organizations, perhaps now really is the best time to dig into that work, to look at those job descriptions, to partner with, your various internal stakeholders that are going to want to weigh in on what the jobs of the future need to be, so that when things ramp up again, you're in a slightly better position to really start focusing on the skills, the behaviors, the competencies, et cetera. They're going to make that meaningful difference for your business, given how work is changing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And does this kind of situation we're all in, with people actually doing work remotely that they've never done remotely before, and finding new ways of doing work, does that actually add another layer of complexity to that redefinition of what the skills for the next couple of years are? I'd imagine it probably will. There's going to be some jobs that are just going to change for good after this, because people are found a different way. Anything else that you're seeing with you think in conversations with talent acquisition leaders that they should be focusing on? Anything else?
I guess the last one, and Renee kind of hit on this earlier, but the employer-employee relationship is just fundamentally going to change, I think, as a result of where we're at. And I alluded to this concept of fairness and how you want to convey that and really live up to that promise of fairness to your candidates. But things like fairness, even things like stability, genuineness, which Renee, you had mentioned earlier, all of those I think become much more valuable elements of an employer value prop, of an employer brand, post-COVID-19 than pre. The drivers in the U.S. at least, the number one driver pre-COVID-19 for candidates was compensation. But I think we're going to see things like stability and integrity really rise to the top in terms of kind of the attributes and qualities of an organization that candidates are seeking. So think about that, right? Think about how you want to communicate that sense of fairness, that genuineness, that stability, and how you want to represent that to candidates moving forward. I think that'll serve you well and differentiate your organization. So, yeah, those were some of the things that I had on my mind. I'd love to, anxious to see feedback from your watchers, and if they have other ideas, I'll be staying tuned to hear from them.
Great.
Yeah, Andy, on that last piece about the fairness, it has me wondering even if maybe you don't have to wait to start communicating that message to whenever we start, most organizations start hiring again. So many people are out of work. You think I would imagine that a lot of people are, combing out there for what jobs are open. Like they want to apply, even if maybe for no other reason than it makes them feel like they're doing something. Like, should organizations be communicating something that conveys that fairness and respect and stability and kind of empathy and understanding for what's going on now, even on their application sites? Do you have some kind of banner that says, even, given what's going on now, our hiring is reduced to impress, to protect, our goal is to protect the employees and the jobs, right now, but we're looking forward to when everybody starts getting back to work. We would love to have your information. Here's what you can expect, or how long, or something that really starts to create that sense of fairness and genuineness and back and forth in the relationship and respect from now. I mean, to your point, there's certainly not all of the jobs that are going to come back immediately, but there's whole sectors that are going to be competing pretty hard to get people up and running quickly, and potentially having already established yourself as somebody who, an organization that has those thoughts and cares about those things might put you at the higher end of somebody's list.
You've definitely seen in the broader kind of commercial marketing messaging, if you just watch the nightly news, and every other commercial that you'll see will be a COVID-related and specific brand message from an organization. And so I think build off of that, right? Yeah. Weave that into your employer and candidate messaging in the exact same way, really for similar reasons, the reasons that you've outlined. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's great points. And Andy, we can't thank you enough. So first of all, thanks for being our first guest. We're both new to this, and so you're very kind to join us. So can't thank you enough. We'll probably have you back on sometime again in the future, but I think we'll wrap there. If you have feedback or topics, or if you want to be a guest, please reach out to us. We'll put the information in the video notes, and looking forward to continuing this. But Renee and Andy, I'm going to sign off, and we'll say goodbye.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.